I was sitting on the back porch when I heard my daughter say it. She didn't know I was home. My truck was in the shop, and my neighbor had dropped me off at the end of the driveway, and I'd come in through the side gate, like I always do when I've been out in the yard. The kitchen window was cracked open an inch, the way my late wife used to keep it when she was cooking, and my daughter was on the phone inside, and I heard every word. "Mum's been gone 3 years, Donnie. He's not our problem. He has savings. He has the house. If he runs out of money, then we'll deal with it. But I am not putting my life on hold waiting for that man to need something." My name is Vincent Caldwell. I'm 67 years old, retired after 31 years with the county assessor's office, and that was my daughter talking about me like I was a bill she hadn't decided whether to pay. I stood there in the side yard for a long moment. The hydrangeas my wife planted the spring before she got sick were blooming blue along the fence. A mockingbird was going through its whole repertoire up in the oak, and I thought, she doesn't know I heard that. I could walk inside, pour myself a glass of water, pretend none of this happened. I'd done that before, let things slide, kept the peace, swallowed the hard feelings down with my coffee every Sunday morning when they came for brunch, and left early and never once asked how I was sleeping. I didn't walk inside. I sat down on the porch step in the afternoon heat and I made a decision. Let me go back a little, because this story doesn't start with that phone call. It starts the way most stories about fathers and daughters start, with love. Genuine, unguarded, probably too generous love. My wife and I had our daughter when we were young. She was our only child, and she was luminous from the start, bright, funny, opinionated, the kind of kid who filled up whatever room she walked into. We worked hard to give her a good life. Not extravagant, but solid. Catholic school through 8th grade, then the public high school she preferred. Family vacations every summer. We drove, never flew, because it was cheaper and because she liked watching the country go by from the back seat. When she got into a university, 3 states away, we didn't blink. We covered tuition, room, board, the laptop she needed for her program, the car she said she couldn't live without. I don't list those things to complain. I list them because context matters and because my daughter grew up knowing we would always find a way. That was true, but somewhere in the years between her leaving for college and the morning I heard her on that phone, "We will always find a way," turned into something different in her mind. It turned into something she was entitled to, rather than something she was given. Her husband, she's been married 9 years, is a decent man on the surface, works in pharmaceutical sales, good teeth, firm handshake, never raises his voice. But he's the kind of man who keeps a mental ledger of everything that flows in and out of a relationship. And somewhere along the way, my daughter started keeping one too. I noticed it in small ways. The Christmas they came and immediately asked if I'd thought about what I was going to do with the house eventually. The birthday dinner where she mentioned twice that the market was really good right now for selling in my neighborhood. The way they started referring to my retirement savings as though it were already a shared resource, something being held in trust for a future they'd already planned. My wife had always been the buffer between us, not in a dramatic way, just in the way that good spouses are. She changed the subject, squeezed my hand under the table, whispered to me later that our daughter didn't mean it the way it sounded. When we lost her to pancreatic cancer, we lost her fast. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I didn't have time to process it, and neither did my daughter, and I think we both retreated into ourselves in ways that made us harder to reach. In the 3 years since, my daughter and I had found a kind of routine. She and her husband came to dinner most Sundays. I drove out to their house for holidays. I babysat my granddaughter. She's 5, her name is Rosie, and she is the uncomplicated joy of my current life. 2 afternoons a week, while my daughter worked from home, which always struck me as a contradiction. But I didn't mention it. I showed up. I fixed things when things broke. I wrote the checks when she asked, and she did ask, not often, but when she did, I never said no. I thought we were doing all right. Turns out, all right looked different from her end of the ledger. The call I overheard wasn't the whole of it. About a week later, when I was going through some papers at my desk, I found a printout my daughter must have left behind the last time she visited. She'd been looking at real estate websites and had printed a listing for a senior living community about 40 minutes from their house. It was circled. The words independent living were underlined in pen, and in the margin, in her handwriting, was a note, "Ask Dad about timeline." I sat with that paper for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Ed has been my attorney for 22 years. He wrote our wills, handled the estate when my wife died, helped me with the house refinance back in the early 2000s. He's the kind of man who doesn't editorialize, who listens completely before he speaks, and who has seen enough of human nature in his career that very little surprises him. I told him what I'd heard. I told him about the printout. I told him I wanted to revisit my estate plan. There was a pause on his end of the line. "Vincent," he said, "before we talk about paperwork, I want to ask you something. Are you doing this from a clear head, or are you doing this from a hurt place?" I thought about it, honestly. "Both," I said, "but I don't think that makes it wrong." He said that was fair, and we made an appointment. What I had was straightforward by most standards. The house paid off, worth somewhere around $400,000 in the current market. A retirement account. A brokerage account my wife and I had built slowly over 30 years, reinvesting dividends, not touching it except once when the furnace died and we had no other option. A life insurance policy I'd maintained since my 30s. In my existing will, the bulk of everything went to my daughter, with a small bequest to my wife's sister and a donation to the church we'd attended for decades. I didn't change everything, but I changed enough. I established a trust for Rosie. Direct, her name on it, accessible when she turns 25. College tuition covered. A start in life that had nothing to do with whether her mother made good decisions. That part felt clean and right, and I didn't question it for a moment. The rest I restructured. A significant portion of the brokerage account I redirected toward a charitable remainder trust, something Ed had mentioned years ago, but I'd never had reason to consider. A local land conservancy I'd always believed in. A scholarship fund at the community college where I'd taken a woodworking class after I retired and found to my surprise that I loved it. The scholarship would go to non-traditional students, people returning to school later in life. I told Ed I wanted to sell the house within the year, not because I needed the money, but because I'd been rattling around in it alone for 3 years, and I was tired of maintaining a 4-bedroom house by myself. And, honestly, because I didn't want it sitting there as a line item in anyone else's long-term plans. I found a small craftsman bungalow 2 miles from where a good friend of mine had retired. A house with a workshop-ready garage, a manageable yard, and a front porch deep enough for 2 chairs. I made all of these decisions quietly. I didn't discuss them with my daughter. I didn't hint at them. I kept showing up on Sundays, kept picking up Rosie from school on Thursdays, kept bringing the same bottle of wine I always brought because I'm a creature of habit and I wasn't going to let any of this make me someone I didn't recognize. But I stopped writing the checks. The first time she asked, a couple of months later, something about a plumbing issue she wanted help with, I told her I was sorry, that I was in the middle of restructuring some of my finances and things were a little tighter than usual. She accepted that easily, which told me she hadn't thought to wonder whether it was true. The second time, it was larger. Her husband had apparently made a poor investment decision, something in a rental property they'd purchased without consulting anyone, and there was a shortfall. She came to dinner and brought it up almost casually, the way you'd mention needing a jump start for your car, like it was a small inconvenience I'd want to help resolve. I said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with that. That sounds stressful." She waited. I didn't say anything else. She asked carefully whether I was in a position to help out. No, I said. Not right now. You'll figure it out, though. You always do. It wasn't a long conversation. She was surprised I could see it, but she recovered quickly. She said something about understanding, about not wanting to put me in a difficult position. But on her way out that night, when she thought I was still in the kitchen, I heard her tell her husband quietly, on the front porch, "He's being weird. I'll talk to him." She did talk to me. The following Sunday, after Rosie was settled with a movie in the other room, my daughter sat down across from me at the kitchen table with the particular posture of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say. "Dad," she said, "I've noticed you seem a little different lately. I want to make sure you're okay. And I want to ask, because I feel like we don't talk about real things enough, what your situation actually looks like right now, financially, just so I can help you plan." I looked at her for a long moment. My daughter, 34 years old, smart, well-dressed, sitting across from me in the kitchen where she'd learned to make scrambled eggs and argued with her mother about curfews and cried the night she didn't get into her first choice for college, and we stayed up until 2 in the morning convincing her the world wasn't ending. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I want to tell you something first." She nodded. Ready to listen or ready to redirect? I couldn't tell which. "About 6 months ago," I said, "I came home through the side gate and the kitchen window was open and I heard you on the phone." The colour didn't exactly drain from her face, but it shifted. She became very still. "I heard what you said about me," I said. "About not putting your life on hold. About waiting until I ran out of money." She started to speak. I held up a hand, not unkindly. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that I made some decisions after that, and I want to be straight with you about them. You're my daughter, and I don't want there to be a version of this where you find out later and feel blindsided." I told her about the changes I'd made. Not every detail. That wasn't the point, but the broad shape of it. The trust for Rosie. The charitable restructuring. The house going on the market in the spring. She sat with it. I'll give her credit. She didn't argue, didn't make it about the money right away. The first thing she said was, "I'm sorry you heard that, Dad. I'm sorry I said it." "I know," I said. "I didn't mean it the way it sounds." "I think you meant most of it," I said, not harshly. "And I think that's okay to admit. I think you've been looking at me and seeing a problem to eventually manage. And I understand how that happens. Your mum is gone. I'm in this big house. You've got your own life going. I get it. But I don't want to be managed. I'm not old, I'm not infirm, and I have a lot of good years ahead of me, and I intend to live them on my own terms." She didn't say anything. "The money was always going to be yours someday," I said. "I never told you that because your mother and I thought it was healthier not to. But it was the plan, and the plan changed, not to punish you, but because I realized I'd been building toward a future that assumed I was just a bridge to something my daughter was waiting on. I don't want to be that. I want to be your father. That's a different thing." The conversation went on for a long time after that. Some of it was hard. She cried, and I let her, and I didn't try to fix it. She said things she probably needed to say about feeling alone since her mother died, about the pressure in her marriage, about how she developed a kind of anxious accounting around money because her husband thought about everything in terms of security and she'd picked up the habit. Some of it made sense. Some of it explained things without excusing them. I told her I understood and that I wasn't cutting her off or cutting her out. I was recalibrating. There's a difference. The months after that were quieter than before, but also more honest. She stopped asking for money, not because I'd warned her off, but because I think something in the way I'd spoken to her had disrupted the old pattern enough that she had to find different footing. Her husband came to me once, about 2 months later, making noise about my plans for the estate. And I looked at him pleasantly and said I had a very good attorney and everything was in excellent order, and I changed the subject to football, and he got the message. I listed the house in March. It sold in 9 days, 32,000 over asking, which my wife would have considered absolutely deranged and would have celebrated by baking her lemon cake. I moved to the bungalow at the end of April. Rosie helped me unpack, which mostly meant she reorganized my kitchen cabinets according to a system that made sense to her and hid my coffee mugs somewhere I still haven't fully located. I took her out for ice cream after, and she held my hand walking back to the car and said, "Grandpa, your new house smells like wood." "That's the workshop," I said. "Can I learn woodworking?" "When you're old enough," I said. "How old?" "7," I said. She nodded very seriously, like we'd signed a contract. That was 4 months ago. My daughter and I have dinner together most weeks, just the two of us sometimes, occasionally with her husband, sometimes with Rosie along. We talk differently now. There's less performance in it, less management on both our parts. She asked me last month, carefully, whether I regretted any of the decisions I'd made. I told her honestly that I didn't. I told her the charitable trust felt like the rightest thing I'd done financially in years, that the bungalow was the first house I'd ever lived in that felt exactly the right size, and that I slept better than I had in a long time. She said, "I'm glad, Dad." I believe she meant it. There's something that happens to fathers, maybe to parents in general, but I can only speak for myself, where you spend so many years being needed in a particular way that you start to confuse being needed with being loved. I loved my daughter through every stage of her life, and she loved me back, but somewhere in the middle of that love we both started showing up as roles rather than people. The provider. The daughter who would eventually handle things. We'd gotten efficient at each other and lost something in the efficiency. Losing my wife broke something open that I hadn't expected. It made me want less distance and more honesty. The conversation I had with my daughter in that kitchen was the most honest one we'd had in years, maybe since she was a teenager, and it happened because I stopped protecting us both from the truth of what was actually going on. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. Families don't get perfect, but I'll take honest over perfect any day of the week. Last Sunday she showed up at the bungalow with Rosie and a bag of groceries, and she cooked dinner, which she almost never does, and afterward we sat on my front porch. It's deep enough for 2 chairs, and I'd gotten a third for occasions, and we watched the evening come in over the rooftops while Rosie fell asleep across our laps like she was 5 years old and the world owed her nothing but rest. That's what I worked for. That's what I restructured my life to get back to. Not the money, not the house, not being right. This right here was always the only thing worth having. I think about that afternoon in the side yard more than I probably should. The mockingbird singing, the hydrangeas, my daughter's voice coming through the cracked kitchen window like she was talking about a utility bill. What I've come to understand is that what happened between us wasn't a sudden thing. It was the slow accumulation of 100 small moments where I said yes when I should have said nothing, where I solved problems that weren't mine to solve, where I let being needed stand in for being close. I built that pattern as much as she did. That's the part that took me a while to sit with honestly. There's a version of this story where I walk away the clear winner, the wronged father who restructured his estate and taught his ungrateful daughter a lesson. I've heard that version in my own head. It's satisfying for about 10 minutes, but it's not really what happened, and it's not what I want to carry forward. What actually happened is that I had to look at myself as clearly as I was looking at her. I had to ask whether the way I'd handled my money with my daughter over the years, always available, never a conversation about limits, had quietly taught her that I was a resource rather than a person. I think it had. Not because she's a bad person, because I never drew the line that would have told her there was one. That took a certain kind of honesty I wasn't used to applying to myself. It's easier to see where other people went wrong. The harder thing, the thing that actually changes something, is asking what your own role was. I'm not a man who finds that easy. I spent 31 years in a government office where precision and procedure were the whole game, where being right was the job. Learning to be wrong about myself, or at least incomplete, has been the work of the years since I lost my wife. What I know now is that genuine integrity, the kind that holds up when no one's watching, when there's no audience for the decision, isn't about dramatic gestures. It's not about the estate restructuring or the house sale, though those were real and right. It's about whether you can look your daughter in the eye across a kitchen table and tell her the truth without needing her to fall apart so you can feel vindicated. I tried to do that. I'm not sure I got it perfectly, but I tried. And the other thing I know is that resilience, real resilience, not the stubborn kind that just refuses to feel things, isn't about never getting hurt. I was hurt. I stood in that side yard and felt something I hadn't felt since the weeks after my wife died, a kind of foundational loneliness that comes from realizing the people you thought were with you had been somewhere else for a while. That's a real feeling, and I let myself have it, but I didn't let it make the decisions. I sat with it, I thought clearly, and then I acted from the clearest part of myself I could reach. Rosie falling asleep across our laps on that porch last Sunday. That didn't happen because I gave my daughter a lesson. It happened because I chose honesty over comfort long enough for something real to grow back. That's the only math that's ever worked in my family. I don't know what your situation looks like, but if you're carrying something like this, a relationship that got efficient at the expense of being true, I'd say the same thing I finally said to myself that afternoon in the side yard. You still have time. You're not done. Start from wherever you actually are, not from where you wish you'd started. That's the only place anything real ever begins.